This is a very important point. I got into a discussion on the social media, my Facebook group, with a guy who claimed that all I ever posted was pictures of pretty people. And I took offense at that because that's not really the case. I don't just take photographs, I make photographs. There's a lot more to it than just pointing a camera at someone. There's makeup, posing, lighting, composition, and then after all of that, I can take it into Photoshop and fix whatever I think needs to be fixed. So that's what I do, and that's what I hope to teach in this program. I grabbed a few seniors and blurred their faces because I wanted to show that there's more to a successful photograph than a pretty face. When you see a gorgeous portrait, try this. Cover up the face. Is the photo still as pretty? Yeah, there are times when the face is the photo, but most of the time our job is to make sure everything coordinates with the subject. Remember, we are responsible for every inch of that image. What would life be without a little controversy, right? Well, let's try to put out that fire with a little education. There aren't any precise definitions of these terms, but there really should be, so that we can communicate accurately. So this is what I came up with. Sometimes you'll hear a photographer, and often a wedding photographer, say if the lighting's bad, you just turn up the ISO. The sunset background is very nice, but obviously the subject is way underexposed. So let's leave the camera settings and just turn up the ISO. Okay, now we have a properly exposed subject, but we lost that pretty sunset background. But look what happens if we add just one light. The sunset that was invisible before is gorgeous here. So while the image on the bottom required adding artificial light, the result is a more natural image because it appears as our eyes and minds saw it. We have to use artificial means to compress the density range because cameras can't capture the wide density range that our eyes can see. In case you're thinking we can combine that sunset with the previous exposure, you get a mess like this, and this would really be hard to fix. And if we reduce the exposure on the background a bit, we get a more saturated color. A photographer needs to know how to do this kind of light control. This is pretty typical of today's look when the photographer is exposed for the face and let everything else blow out. This isn't what I want either. This is what I want. A proper exposure on the face and detail in the highlights. This program will teach you how to accomplish this for a more professional look. I know this all sounds like a rant, but really it's about education and furthering the profession. This image is not acceptable, and it would take a lot of work to make it saleable. There's an easier way. Simply using TTL flash and one LED couldn't be easier, and yields results like this. I'll teach you how to do all this in this course. Some lighting techniques being used today, like for the image on the left, were considered mistakes years ago. Well, guess what? They still are mistakes. One on-camera flash bounced off the ceiling to my right was all it took to fix this. Same story inside. The exposure is fine here, but the lighting is poor. We can't rely on ISO to save bad light. Just one flash unit in a softbox can overpower that bad light. It's possible to get decent results without adding light, such as when excellent light is already there. But when it isn't, you'll spend more time at the computer fixing it than you would have had you lit it properly. For this image, I tried it without adding light because to my eye it seemed that there was a hint of the kind of light that I wanted. This was the final result, but as you can imagine, it took a lot of Photoshop work to get there. I lit this image with one TTL softbox above her and to our right. And here's all I had to do for the final result. Just some cleanup. This is way easier than all the work that I had to do on the first example. That is why I get so worked up over proper lighting. You can see here that there's a mismatch between the expression and the lighting, so natural light wasn't the best choice. This image was lit with a softbox for a main light. In general, a good main light is needed if the subject is looking at the camera, and especially if he or she is smiling. But I don't want you to think we have to manipulate the light for every image. For a sullen mood, overcast light is just fine, especially if they aren't looking at the camera. Tilting the subject's head up to the light is always a good alternative when the sky is the main source of illumination. Another thing to consider is that for a spontaneous capture like this, the lighting doesn't have to be perfect. I used TTL off-camera flash here, and we have a nice balance of sky to foreground. But this is the one that the client preferred. Why? I don't know, maybe because they felt it was more natural. That's something to keep in mind. I'll often shoot an image with flash because I know the light will be very clean. But then I'll also shoot one without flash if I anticipate doing something more artistic with it. I prefer natural light for these types of images. Sometimes introducing additional lighting might give you a better exposure, but cause some other unforeseeable problems like the unflattering shadowing on her dress. So in cases like that, just letting the light be lends itself to a more emotional outcome. There's another consideration to choose existing light or added light, and that's unwanted shadows. This is a pullback for the next series of images. We want the light high because that's where we're accustomed to see light coming from. So I had her tilt her head up to avoid a shadow from her hat. But I don't like her head up like that. But if we bring her head down, we get a nasty shadow that would be very hard to fix in Photoshop. So I turned off the flash and got this. Obviously her face is too dark, but the light on her face is at least shadowless. That was relatively easy to fix, along with some other stuff that needed fixing. So using existing light required some Photoshop work, but it was the better choice here. What about shooting with virtually no directional light on the subject? Can that work? Here I exposed for a balance between the window and the fireplace, so exposure-wise it's fine. But no light on the subject means no money in my pocket. Raising the overall levels to get an appropriate exposure on the face blows out the window but results in a nice high-key image. And that's okay. Can we do better? I lightened that statue and made it better. Can we do better still? Oh, you bet. By adding off-camera flash to light the subject, we made her look better, and we retained the pretty pastel colors around her.